I never thought I'd question everything I believed about God until the day I died. My name is Samir, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been guided by faith. Raised in a devout Muslim household, my days were structured around prayer, study, and reflection. My father, a retired imam, instilled in us a deep love for the Quran, while my mother's gentle reminders kept our home brimming with piety and discipline. My younger brother, Ali, was the lively one, always asking questions and challenging traditions in ways I never dared to. I took pride in being the serious one in the family, dedicating myself fully to God's teachings. I thrived on theological discussions, particularly with my best friend Fareed, whose curiosity about other faiths sometimes frustrated me. We often debated Christianity, their concept of salvation, the Trinity, and above all, the divinity of Jesus. To me, these ideas felt irrational, even dangerous, but while I projected unwavering certainty, a small unspoken doubt lingered deep within me. Was I truly living in a way that guaranteed salvation? And what if I wasn't? I buried those thoughts under layers of devotion, reassuring myself that good deeds and steadfast belief were enough. Life went on like this, predictable and steady, until the day everything changed. Before we dive deeper into my extraordinary story of life, death, and the truth I discovered beyond the veil, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single detail of this life-changing journey. It was a Friday evening, just after our family prayers. The air was thick with the comforting aroma of my mother's biryani as we gathered around the dinner table. My father shared stories from his youth. Ali cracked a joke that had everyone laughing, and my mother chided him lovingly for talking with his mouth full. I smiled, taking it all in. But just as I reached for another helping, I felt a sudden tightness in my chest. At first, I thought it was nothing, just the spicy food, but the discomfort grew sharper, like a vice tightening around my heart. "Samir, are you okay?" Ali asked, his voice breaking through the haze. I tried to nod, but the pain overwhelmed me. The room blurred, my breaths came in short gasps, and I could hear my mother's panicked voice calling for help. "Stay with us." My father's voice trembled as everything around me faded to black. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment I left this world and stepped into something far greater than I could have ever imagined. The last thing I remember before the pain took over was my mother's worried face, her hands trembling as she held mine. It was like the world had gone quiet, save for the erratic pounding of my heart. My vision blurred, and a deep sense of unease settled in my chest. Earlier that day, everything had been normal. I had woken up early, as I always did, to perform Fajr. The day unfolded like countless others before it. Work, prayer, and time with family. We were visiting relatives that evening, and the house was alive with laughter, the clinking of tea glasses, and the aroma of freshly made samosas. I felt the first twinge of discomfort while sitting on the couch, talking with my uncle about his travels. It wasn't sharp, just a dull ache near my chest. I brushed it off, thinking it was indigestion or perhaps the result of sitting in an awkward position. My brother, Ali, noticed my discomfort. "You okay, bhai?" he asked, tilting his head toward me. "I'm fine, Ali, just tired, that's all," I replied, waving him off with a faint smile. But I wasn't fine. The ache didn't go away. It grew, slowly spreading across my chest like a creeping shadow. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but it felt like my lungs couldn't fully expand. The room seemed brighter all of a sudden, the lights harsh against my eyes. I excused myself and stepped outside for some air, hoping it would help. The cool evening breeze brushed against my face, but the tightness in my chest only worsened. My breathing became shallow, my hands clammy. Ali followed me out, his concern evident. "Samir, you don't look good. Let's get you checked out." "I don't need a doctor, Ali. It's nothing," I said. though even I didn't believe my own words at that point. But Ali wasn't one to back down. "You're pale and you're sweating. Stop being stubborn. We're going to the hospital." Before I could protest, he was already calling our cousin, who worked nearby and could drive us there quickly. I wanted to argue, to tell him it wasn't necessary, but deep down, fear was beginning to creep in. What if this was something serious? What if I wasn't as invincible as I thought? The drive to the hospital felt like it lasted an eternity. The car's interior was stifling, the air heavy with tension. I could hear Ali murmuring prayers under his breath, his usual joking demeanor replaced by a grim seriousness. When we arrived, the emergency room was a blur of fluorescent lights and hurried footsteps. Nurses rushed to my side, their faces calm but focused. They asked questions I could barely register: my name, my symptoms, my medical history. I tried to answer, but the words felt thick in my throat. "His heart rate is irregular," one of the nurses said, her voice clipped and professional. The doctor appeared, his expression serious. "We're going to run some tests, but this looks like a heart attack," he said, turning to the staff. "Prepare the ECG and get the crash cart ready." Heart attack. The words echoed in my mind, louder than anything else in the room. I was too young for this, or so I thought. Panic gripped me, and I felt my chest tighten even more. As they began their work, hooking me up to machines and administering medications, I closed my eyes and whispered the Shahada, my lips trembling. "La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah." There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is His messenger. It was the one thing I could cling to, the one anchor in the storm of fear and chaos. I had recited these words countless times in my life, but now they carried a weight I had never felt before. What if this was the end? What if I was about to stand before my Creator, unprepared? The beeping of machines and the hurried voices of the medical staff faded into the background as I focused on the prayer. My heart raced, not just from the pain, but from the realization that everything I had built my life around might come to a sudden halt. "Stay with us, Samir," the doctor's voice cut through my thoughts, firm but encouraging. I opened my eyes briefly, catching a glimpse of Ali standing just outside the room, his hands clasped tightly in prayer. He looked terrified. I wanted to reassure him, to tell him I'd be fine, but I couldn't find the strength to speak. Instead, I closed my eyes again, surrendering myself to the will of Allah. I thought about my parents, my brother, and all the people I had left behind in that moment. The pain was overwhelming, but something else began to rise within me, a strange, almost calming sense of detachment. It was as if I were hovering between two worlds, my body anchored to this one, but my soul being pulled towards something unknown. I had no idea then that this moment was just the beginning of a journey I could never have imagined. It was as if a switch had been flipped. One moment I was consumed by the chaos of the hospital room, the frantic shouts of the doctors, the cold stab of needles in my arm, the beeping machines echoing in my ears. The next, there was silence. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but a deep, enveloping stillness that seemed to stretch beyond sound itself. I opened my eyes, or at least I thought I did, but the perspective was all wrong. I wasn't lying on the hospital bed anymore. I was above it. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. Below me, I saw my own body, pale and lifeless, surrounded by medical staff. The doctor leaned over me, barking orders as nurses worked quickly to attach wires and check readings. My brother, Ali, stood at the edge of the room, his hands covering his mouth, his eyes wide with fear. It should have terrified me, but it didn't. Instead, I felt a strange calmness, as though the panic and pain I had been drowning in moments before were no longer part of me. I floated there, weightless, suspended in an unseen current that seemed to hold me gently, like a mother cradling a child. I watched as they worked on me, my body unmoving, my chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. It was surreal, like watching a scene from a movie where I was both the actor and the audience. I felt no connection to the figure on the bed, No sense of ownership over the lifeless shell that everyone else seemed so desperate to save. What's happening to me? I thought. The question lingered, unanswered, as I drifted slightly higher, my view expanding. The room below grew smaller, but every detail remained sharp. I could see the glint of the defibrillator paddles in the nurse's hands, the tear that escaped Ali's eye as he turned away, unable to watch any longer. It was all so vivid, so clear. Yet I couldn't feel the urgency they seemed to be wrapped in. Confusion began to creep in, breaking through the calm. Am I dead? I wondered. The thought felt distant, almost academic, as if it belonged to someone else. I wasn't afraid, but I wasn't ready to accept it either. Then I noticed something. In the far corner of the room, past the harsh fluorescent lights and bustling figures, there was a glow, a soft golden light that pulsed gently like it was breathing. It wasn't blinding or harsh, it was warm, inviting, and alive in a way I couldn't explain. The light seemed to call to me, though no words were spoken. It was a pull, subtle but undeniable, like the tide drawing the shore closer to the sea. I felt an urge to move toward it, an instinctual longing that didn't come from my mind but from somewhere deeper. As I focused on the light, the room around me seemed to fade. The sounds of the hospital, voices, machines, footsteps, muffled into a distant hum. Even my body, still lying on the bed, became less significant. All that mattered was the light. It wasn't just light, though. It was something more. It radiated a sense of peace, a love so profound it was almost overwhelming. It felt personal, as if it knew me, not the version of me that the world saw, but the deepest parts of who I was. My joys, my fears, my struggles. It knew it all, and yet it welcomed me without hesitation. I drifted closer, the pull growing stronger with each passing moment. The warmth of the light wrapped around me, not in a physical sense, but in a way that touched my very essence. It was as though it was inviting me home, to a place I had forgotten but somehow always belonged to. Yet, as I moved closer, a flicker of doubt held me back. I thought of my family, of my mother's gentle smile, my father's proud but silent support, and Ali's stubborn loyalty. I thought of my unfinished prayers, the things I had yet to do, the questions I still carried. Was this it? Was I really leaving it all behind? The calm I had felt began to waver, replaced by a growing sense of conflict. Part of me wanted to surrender, to let the light take me wherever it led. But another part of me, smaller but insistent, wanted to fight, to cling to the life I had known, even if it was slipping away. I turned my gaze back to the room below, to the people fighting for me, praying for me. Their faces blurred slightly, but I could still feel their love, their desperation. The light pulsed again, steady and patient, as if waiting for me to decide. I hovered there, caught between two worlds, unsure of which one I truly belonged to. The pull of the light was impossible to resist. It wasn't like being dragged or pushed. It was more like an irresistible invitation, a gentle yet powerful beckoning that came from deep within me. I floated closer, and as I did, the warmth grew stronger. It wasn't just physical warmth. It was something much deeper, something that seemed to soothe every ache, calm every fear, and fill every empty space inside me. The closer I got, the less aware I became of the hospital room fading behind me. The shouts of the doctors, the sound of the machines, even the memory of my own body. They all became distant echoes, like they belonged to another life entirely. And then, as I neared the source of the light, I realized that it wasn't just light. There was a presence within it, something alive and aware. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel it as though it was looking right at me, or rather into me. Who are you?" I whispered, though my voice felt more like a thought than a sound. There was no audible reply, but the answer came nonetheless. It wasn't in words, but in a deep knowing that settled into my very being. This presence knew me, truly knew me. It wasn't just aware of my name or my life. It knew every corner of my heart, every thought I had ever had. every deed I had ever done, both good and bad. And yet there was no judgment, no condemnation. Instead, there was love. Pure, unconditional love that wrapped around me like a warm blanket on a cold night. It was overwhelming, and tears filled my eyes, or at least it felt like they did. The light grew brighter, and as it did, a figure began to take shape within it. At first, it was hard to see clearly, as if I was looking through a mist, but slowly the details became clearer. It was a man, but not like any man I had ever seen. His presence was majestic, yet humble, powerful, yet gentle. His face radiated compassion, and his eyes were unlike anything I could describe. They were filled with a love so deep, so pure, that it felt like it could heal the entire world. I didn't need to ask who he was. Somehow I already knew. Jesus. The name escaped my lips before I even realized I was speaking. The figure nodded, his expression full of kindness. Yes, he said, his voice gentle but firm, like the sound of a river flowing over smooth stones. A wave of shock rippled through me. My mind raced, struggling to process what I was experiencing. This couldn't be real. It didn't fit with everything I had been taught, everything I had believed. Jesus was a prophet, not this. But how? I stammered. How can this be? This isn't what I was taught. This isn't... My voice trailed off, the words feeling inadequate in the face of what I was seeing. Jesus stepped closer, his movements calm and deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. The light around him seemed to pulse gently, matching the rhythm of my own heartbeat. "My child," he said, and his voice was like a melody, soothing and reassuring. "You have many questions, and I know your heart is heavy with doubt. But I am here to show you the truth, not to condemn, but to invite you into a deeper understanding." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that pierced straight through me. It wasn't just what he was saying. It was how he said it, with a love so genuine and personal that it felt as though I was the only person in the universe he was speaking to. I wanted to respond, to ask the questions swirling in my mind, but I couldn't find the words. All I could do was stand there trembling as his presence washed over me. He reached out his hand, and though he was still some distance away, I felt the warmth of his touch as though he was right next to me. It wasn't just a physical warmth. It was a warmth that filled my soul, melting away the fear and doubt that had gripped me. "Come," he said, his voice filled with a gentle authority. "There is much I wish to show you." I hesitated, torn between the desire to move forward and the weight of everything I had believed up until this moment. This went against everything I had been taught, everything I had built my faith on. And yet, in his presence, none of that seemed to matter. It wasn't that my beliefs felt wrong exactly. It was more like they were incomplete, like a puzzle with missing pieces. And somehow, I knew that he held the pieces I had been searching for, even if I hadn't realized it until now. As I stood there, caught between my old life and the unknown path ahead, he waited patiently, his hand still extended. There was no pressure, no demand, only an invitation. And deep down, I knew I had a choice to make. The warmth of the light enveloped me as Jesus extended his hand, a gesture so simple, yet carrying immense significance. For a moment, I hesitated, the weight of everything I had known pressing down on me like an anchor. But the love radiating from him, so pure and untainted, melted away my resistance. I stepped forward, and as I did, the space around us transformed. It wasn't like being transported physically, it was more like stepping into a story, a living, breathing reality unfolding before my eyes. The light faded slightly, and I found myself standing in the middle of a desert. The air was hot, the ground dry and cracked. In the distance I saw a man, young, determined, and deep in prayer. Something about him felt familiar. "That is you, Samir," Jesus said, his voice soft but firm. "Your devotion, your prayers, your longing for truth. It has not gone unnoticed." I watched in awe as the younger version of me bowed repeatedly, whispering prayers with fervor. My heart swelled with recognition but also with questions. Why was I seeing this? Before I could ask, the scene shifted. I was no longer in the desert, but on the shores of a vast sea. A man I instantly recognized as Jesus walked along the water's edge. His footsteps left no marks, and yet every movement seemed to ripple with purpose. He approached a small group of fishermen, their nets tangled and worn. Without hesitation, he spoke to them, his voice calm but commanding. "Follow me," he said, and to my astonishment, the men dropped everything, nets, boats, their livelihood, and followed without question. As I watched, Jesus turned to me. "Do you see, Samir?" They followed because they knew the truth when they saw it. Their hearts were ready. The scene shifted again, and now I was in a crowded marketplace. People shouted, bartered, and bustled about, but all activity stopped when Jesus entered. A man with a withered hand approached him, his eyes filled with desperation. "Lord, if you are willing, you can heal me," the man said. Jesus stepped closer, his expression filled with compassion. "I am willing," he said, reaching out to touch the man's hand. Instantly, the hand was restored, whole and strong. The crowd gasped, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. "These miracles," I whispered, unable to contain my awe. "I read about them, but seeing them, it's different." Jesus nodded, his gaze never leaving mine. "It is not the miracles themselves that matter, Samir. It is what they reveal, my love for those who are broken, my desire to heal not just bodies, but hearts." Before I could respond, the scene changed once more. This time I was in a dimly lit room. A group of men sat around a table, their faces somber. Jesus stood among them, breaking bread and passing a cup of wine. "This is my body given for you," he said, his voice heavy with meaning. "This is my blood shed for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in remembrance of me." I felt a pang in my chest as I realized the significance of his words. This wasn't just a meal, it was a declaration, a covenant. The love in his voice was undeniable, yet there was also a deep sadness, as if he knew what was to come. The air around me grew heavy, and suddenly I was standing at the foot of a hill. The sky was dark, the wind howling. Before me was a wooden cross, and on it hung Jesus. His body was battered, his face streaked with blood and sweat. Yet even in his suffering, there was no hatred in his eyes, only love. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The sight was both horrifying and humbling. I felt as though I was witnessing the weight of the world's pain being borne by this one man. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, "Why would you do this? Why would you endure this?" "For you," came his voice, though his lips didn't move. "For all who would come to me. To reconcile what was lost, to bring life where there was death." The scene shifted again, and now I stood in a garden. The morning light was soft, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Before me was an empty tomb, the stone rolled away. And then I saw him, Jesus, alive, radiant and triumphant. "I am the resurrection and the life," he said, his voice echoing in the stillness. "Whoever believes in me will live, even though they die." I dropped to my knees, overwhelmed by the weight of everything I had seen. My mind raced, trying to process it all, the miracles, the sacrifice, the resurrection. It was too much, too profound, and yet it was undeniably true. The love I felt radiating from him was unlike anything I had ever known, a love that demanded nothing but gave everything. Jesus stepped closer, his hand once again outstretched. "Samir," he said, his tone gentle yet firm, "the truth has been shown to you, not to force you, but to invite you. The choice is yours." My heart pounded as I looked up at him, the enormity of the moment sinking in. The visions had shown me so much, but they had also left me with questions that only I could answer. The light around us shimmered like a veil of warmth, and before I could even ask what was happening, I felt myself being carried into a realm that words could hardly describe. It was as though I had stepped into a painting of perfection, yet it was alive. every color, every sound, every scent vibrating with life and harmony. I stood at the edge of a vast garden that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The grass beneath my feet was soft, almost glowing with a vibrant green hue. Trees bore fruits of every kind imaginable, their leaves rustling gently even though there was no breeze. Streams of crystal-clear water flowed, their surfaces reflecting the most radiant light. The air itself carried a fragrance that I could not identify but somehow felt like home. "This," Jesus said, gesturing with an open hand, "is what I have prepared for those who love me and accept my gift." The peace of the place seeped into my very soul. Everywhere I looked, there was joy, children laughing, people embracing, and faces radiating a happiness that was untainted by any hint of sorrow. I noticed an elderly man sitting under a tree, reading a book with a smile so serene it brought tears to my eyes. Nearby, a young woman hummed a melody, her voice blending seamlessly with the symphony of nature around her. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice trembling. "This is heaven," Jesus replied, his tone gentle but firm. "It is the fulfillment of what the heart longs for, the union with God's love, the restoration of all that was lost." As I walked with him, I noticed something unusual. Every person I saw seemed to carry a unique light, as though their very existence was a reflection of the joy and peace they felt. There were no signs of division, no shadows of bitterness or regret. It was a place of perfect unity where love was the air everyone breathed. I turned to Jesus, my heart heavy with questions. How can anyone deserve this? How can anyone be worthy of such a place? He stopped and looked at me, his eyes filled with compassion. "No one deserves this, Samir. It is not earned by deeds or efforts. It is a gift of grace given freely to those who believe, to those who receive it with an open heart." His words pierced me. My entire life had been built around striving, around doing enough to be counted worthy in the eyes of God, and yet, here I was, being told that this place was not a reward for effort, but a gift of love. It was both liberating and unsettling. Before I could dwell further on my thoughts, the light around us began to dim, and the air grew heavier. The peace that had surrounded me moments ago faded, replaced by an oppressive weight. The scene shifted abruptly, and I found myself standing in a barren wasteland. The ground was cracked and lifeless, the air thick with an acrid smell. In the distance, I saw flames licking at the horizon, their glow casting eerie shadows. "This," Jesus said, his voice somber, "is hell." The despair in this place was palpable. Unlike the serenity of heaven, there was no light here, only darkness and an overwhelming sense of separation. I heard cries, agonized, mournful cries that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The sound cut through me, leaving a deep ache in my chest. I saw figures moving in the distance, their forms shrouded in shadows. They reached out, as if grasping for something, anything, that could bring relief. But their efforts were in vain. There was no comfort here, no respite. The torment wasn't just physical, it was a deep, soul-crushing regret, a realization of being eternally cut off from the source of all love and peace. "What causes this place to exist?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Separation," Jesus replied. "It is the result of rejecting God's love, of turning away from the grace that was freely offered. It is not my desire for anyone to be here, Samir. I created humanity for love, for relationship, for life, but I do not force anyone to accept me. Love cannot be coerced, it must be chosen." I struggled to comprehend it all. The cries, the anguish, it was too much. I turned to Jesus, tears streaming down my face. Is there no hope for them? Is there no way out? His expression was one of deep sorrow. While they lived, the door was open, the invitation extended, but they chose to walk their own path, rejecting the grace that was offered. Even now my heart aches for them. The flames in the distance seemed to grow brighter, their heat pressing against me. I felt a deep dread, an overwhelming sense of how terrible it would be to exist in such a place forever. And yet, I also felt a glimmer of understanding. This was not a punishment inflicted by an angry God. It was the natural consequence of rejecting the love and grace that had been freely given. As the scene faded and I found myself back in the presence of Jesus, I felt both shaken and humbled. The contrast between the two realms could not have been more stark. One was a place of eternal joy, the other of eternal separation, and the difference lay not in deeds or efforts, but in a choice, a simple yet profound choice to accept or reject the gift of grace. Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder, his touch grounding me. "You have seen the truth, Samir. Now you must decide what to do with it." My mind swirled with emotions, gratitude, fear, hope, and a deep, unshakable sense of responsibility. What I had seen could not be unseen. The weight of the choice before me was immense, but I knew it was mine to make. I stood in the middle of heaven, my feet touching the soft, glowing grass, but my heart was torn in two. The beauty around me was overwhelming, a peace so deep and pure that it felt like my soul had finally come home. Yet as much as I wanted to stay, there was a sense of responsibility tugging at me, something telling me that I couldn't just remain here, basking in the light forever. I looked up at Jesus, who stood beside me, his presence as comforting as the very air I breathed. "You have seen what is offered," Jesus said, his voice soft but filled with authority. "Now, Samir, the choice is yours. Will you accept the gift of salvation?" The words echoed in my mind like a distant bell, a ringing clarity. I felt the weight of the question deep in my chest. I knew what I had to do, yet I hesitated. This was a choice that would change everything. To accept this grace, to accept Jesus, meant letting go of everything I had believed before. It was a leap into the unknown, into a reality where I was no longer just following rules and rituals, but choosing to trust in a love so vast, so unmeasurable, that it defied logic. The peace that surrounded me seemed to hum with a quiet urgency. I knew the answer, yet my mind kept playing tricks on me, whispering doubts. Could this truly be real? Could everything I had believed, all my life's teachings, be wrong? Was this decision truly the right one? I felt Jesus' eyes on me, filled with understanding. He knew the conflict raging within me, knew the fears and doubts that tugged at my heart. But his presence was calm, unwavering. "You are not alone, Samir," he said. "You have nothing to fear. Trust in the love that has always been there for you." For a moment I closed my eyes, letting the peace of the place wash over me. I felt the presence of something far greater than myself, something that transcended my own understanding. I could feel the weight of my past, the burdens of doubt, the moments when I had questioned my own faith, and yet I knew now none of that mattered. What mattered was the present, this moment of choice. Slowly I let go of the tension in my chest and whispered, "I accept." The words felt heavy, but they also felt freeing. As soon as I said them, something shifted within me. It was as though the very air around me changed, as if the light around us intensified, wrapping me in warmth and love. I looked up at Jesus, and in that moment I saw nothing but infinite love reflected in his eyes. "You have made the right choice," Jesus said, smiling with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. "Salvation is not earned, Samir. It is a gift of grace freely given, and now your journey begins." I felt a profound sense of peace flood my heart, but just as quickly a sense of longing crept in. Heaven was so beautiful, so full of love and light, and I wanted to stay. I didn't want to leave the warmth, the joy, the feeling of being truly at peace. But then, I heard Jesus speak again, his voice carrying a note of gentle authority. "Your time here is not yet," he said. "You have seen the truth, but there is more for you to do. You must return." A chill swept through me and I felt a pang of fear. "Return?" I repeated, confused. "But I don't want to leave. This place, this peace, this love, it's everything I've ever longed for." Jesus looked at me, his expression filled with compassion. I know, Samir, and I have prepared this for you. But there is a world waiting for you, a world that needs to hear the truth you have seen. Your journey is not over. There are many who are lost, who are searching for what you have found. You must go back and share this message. You must show them the way. The words struck me like a bolt of lightning. I understood, deep in my soul, that my life had a new purpose. I had been shown the truth, not just for myself, but for the world. I had seen the love, the grace, the peace that awaited those who accepted Jesus, and now it was my responsibility to share that truth. But even as my heart swelled with this newfound purpose, the thought of leaving heaven, leaving this unending peace, filled me with a deep reluctance. How could I go back to the chaos and uncertainty of the world? How could I return to a life filled with struggles, doubts, and fears when I had just tasted the perfection of heaven? I understand, I whispered, my voice trembling. But I'm not ready. I don't want to leave. Jesus placed a hand gently on my shoulder. You are never alone, Samir. The love you've felt here will go with you. The peace, the grace, the truth. It will remain within you. You are not returning to face the world on your own. You will be guided, and you will carry this light with you. His words calmed my heart, but the uncertainty still lingered. I knew I had to go back, but the thought of leaving this place was almost unbearable. Still, I trusted Jesus. He had shown me the truth. He had opened my eyes, and now I had no choice but to follow where he led. The decision was made, and as if in response, the light around us began to shift, softening into a familiar, comforting glow. I knew that my time in heaven was coming to an end, but I also knew that my journey was just beginning. Go now, Samir, Jesus said, his voice filled with love. The world awaits. With a final lingering look at the paradise around me, I took a deep breath and prepared myself to return. My heart was filled with purpose now, and I felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. I had seen the truth, and nothing could take that away. I opened my eyes slowly, the blinding hospital lights above me forcing a groan from my lips. My chest ached, but not from pain. No, it was the heaviness of what I had just experienced, what I had just come to understand. The soft beeping of machines and the rustling sounds of the room brought me back to reality, but it felt like I was still caught somewhere between two worlds. Samir, you're awake. My brother's voice pierced through the haze, and I turned my head toward him, finding him standing at my bedside, relief written all over his face. Behind him, my parents and cousins hovered, watching me with a mix of concern and joy. I could see the tears in their eyes, but my mind was far away. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and my words came out in a rasp. What happened? The question seemed pointless. How could I explain what had just occurred? How could I put into words the vastness of the light, the peace, the love I had felt? How could I explain the deep truth I now carried in my heart? The doctor came in then, his face full of concern, but his eyes softened when he saw that I was conscious. Samir, you had a heart attack, he said. We thought we might lose you. His voice held a mixture of relief and professionalism. You're lucky to be alive. Lucky? How could I be lucky when I had just faced the eternal, when I had seen heaven and hell with my own eyes, when I had spoken to Jesus himself? The word lucky felt small in comparison to what I had witnessed, but I didn't have the strength to explain that. Not yet. As I sat there, trying to process the reality of the situation, the memories of what had happened began to resurface, more vivid than ever. Jesus' words, the love he shared with me, the glimpses of heaven's beauty, it was all so real, so overwhelmingly true. But as the days passed and I began to regain my strength, I realized that the world around me hadn't changed. My family was still worried, my friends still skeptical, and the life I had known seemed almost trivial now compared to what I had seen. Over the next few weeks, I struggled to find words for what had happened. How could I explain the profound experience I had, one that had altered the very core of my being? How could I share the truth that Jesus, the Savior I had rejected all my life, was the key to eternal life? I started small. Conversations with my family, with close friends, with anyone who would listen. At first, their reactions were mixed. Some looked at me with disbelief, others with concern for my mental state. "Samir, you're just recovering. Maybe it was the medication or the stress," they'd say. "This isn't like you." But I knew better. I had seen the truth with my own eyes. I had stood in the presence of divine love. I had witnessed the reality of heaven and hell. And now, I couldn't stay silent. I began reaching out to those around me, even those who didn't share my faith. I spoke to people from different walks of life, different religions, and those who had no belief at all. I shared my experience, hoping that my story would open their hearts. But not everyone was receptive. The skeptics came first. They questioned everything: my motives, my mental state, the very nature of the experience I had described. Some of them laughed, dismissing me as a man who had simply had a near-death hallucination. "You're just confused," one of them said. "Everyone who has a close call like that thinks they've seen something divine." But the fire inside me burned brighter with each rejection. I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. I knew the love that had embraced me, the grace that had been extended to me, and I couldn't let it go. I continued to share my story, not to convince anyone, but to plant seeds, seeds of truth. I didn't have all the answers, and I wasn't trying to convert anyone. I simply wanted people to know that salvation was a gift, freely given by a loving Creator. That love wasn't just for a select few, it was for everyone. Jesus, the man I had once rejected, was the way, the truth, and the life. There were moments of doubt, times when I wondered if my efforts were in vain. People would smile politely, nod, and then walk away, still unconvinced. Some would argue, trying to poke holes in my story. "You're just trying to find meaning in something that doesn't exist," one man said. "There's no proof, no evidence." But I had seen it with my own eyes, and that was enough. The more I spoke, the more my heart burned with a deep sense of purpose. The world needed to hear the truth. And though the resistance I faced was strong, I knew my mission wasn't about forcing anyone to believe. It was about sharing the love and grace that had changed my life. In the quiet moments, when the doubts crept in, I would think back to what I had experienced, the warmth of heaven, the peace that filled me, the voice of Jesus calling me to return. I knew, deep in my soul, that I was on the right path. I didn't need the approval of others. I needed to stay faithful to the truth I had been shown. And so I moved forward, changed, but resolute. My life was no longer about rules or rituals. It was about love. The love I had seen in heaven, the love that Jesus offered freely, was the truth I would carry with me forever. The world was filled with darkness, confusion, and pain, but I had found the light, and no matter the challenges ahead, I knew one thing for sure: I was called to share that light with everyone I could.